A historic mansion block weighing over 700 tons needs to be moved right through a city. You have to know exactly what you're doing, or someone could get killed. Can a dedicated team save this architectural gem in one of the year's biggest moves? A vintage aircraft from World War II? Look at this amount of corrosion. Can this disintegrating plane survive a grueling 54-kilometer journey? The crews must face nightmare traffic at this time of night. People have been drinking, getting more aggressive and messy. Any miscalculations, if it rains or if they're off schedule by noon, could spell disaster. Two huge historic hulks, two teams on a mission to move them, two epic endeavors that will test the nerves of those who dare. These are monster moves. Des Moines sits in the heart of rural Iowa. It's one of the fastest-growing cities in America's Midwest, with agricultural and financial businesses snapping up land. Less than a century ago, Des Moines was a small prairie town, a farming community with strong family ties. Today, there's hardly anything left of the old city. The Marilla Mansion block is one of the last historic buildings to have survived, and it too is scheduled for demolition to make way for a corporate headquarters. We knew it was in jeopardy, they say. We've known for a while, but we thought we'd have a few years to come up with some kind of preservation plan. Turns out, we have just 4 months. Built in 1903, the Marilla is a rare example of classical revival architecture. This 3-story masonry building was once a classic apartment block of its time. 100 years ago, this area would have been a neighborhood, houses everywhere, and the Marilla is the last one standing. Rob McCarman of the local Preservation Society is desperate to save the Marilla from the wrecking ball. With just 1 month left before the developers take over, Rob appeals to local property developer Phil Kaiser, who shares his passion for historic buildings. It's neat. The original mailboxes in front, the marble entryway, it's just gorgeous, says Phil. These beautiful swinging doors, the original wood floors, even the old intercom system. They don't make things like they used to, right? No. The Marilla is a perfect example of what our architecture looked like at the turn of the century. There aren't many buildings like this left, especially in the Midwest. We need to preserve it. Phil agrees to buy and restore the Marilla to create period luxury apartments. But to make this plan work, he must move the building clear across the city onto a plot of land he owns. It's well worth it, Phil says. Not only if I make a profit, but for the love of it. Moving the Marilla will cost $250,000, a good price if the building survives. It must travel almost 1 kilometer through the heart of a busy city. The streets are narrow, the corners tight, the curbs high, and there are frequent fire hydrants. Moving such a large building is fraught with hazards. At 700 tons, the Marilla will be the largest move undertaken anywhere in America this year. It's going to take a big man to move such a big building. Midwest house mover Jeremy Patterson. The magnitude of this job is unbelievable, he says. It's one of the largest structures we'll ever move. We have to bring our A game, our best crew. It's nearly impossible, but we'll make it happen. This move will be a milestone in Jeremy's career. What we have here is a massive 705-ton, 4 to 5 layer brick structure. There aren't many ways to move this. One option would be to tear it down, brick by brick, board by board. When a building is extremely fragile, dismantling it completely is often safest. Movers in England took almost a year to dismantle a 17th-century farmhouse before shipping it to America. Its wooden walls, bound with traditional manure mortar, were carefully mapped and cleaned. 1,200 fragments were shipped 6,000 kilometers to a Virginia farmstead. It took 9 months and over 100 buckets of horse manure to glue the farmhouse back together. For the Marilla, dismantling would take too long. They have just 30 days to clear the site or face demolition. Option 2, put it on tracks and roll it sideways. Heavy buildings can be pushed on rails with hydraulic rams. In 1975, the city of Most in Czechoslovakia sat atop 87 million tons of coal. Miners demolished every medieval building except its Gothic cathedral. Ingeniously, engineers wrapped the 10,000-ton cathedral inside and out with a protective metal frame and used hydraulics to push it over a specially built railway. It took 28 days to move it over a mile to safety. Where it stands today, a lone relic of the city's past. But Des Moines city officials won't allow Jeremy to demolish any buildings along the Marilla's route. The only option left is to place a massive steel framework under the structure, jack it up, put 24 hydraulic dollies beneath it, and roll it down the highway. Before the risky journey, Jeremy removes the Marilla's precious interior features. The marble hallway could crack in transit. Got a screw. Got it? Let's put a screw there. I'm not losing any fingers. I'm not a risk taker. Someone jokes. This slab is heavy, really heavy. The countdown has started. Rob knows this move is the Marilla's last hope. Any delay could be fatal. If we can't get this done in 4 weeks, the building's coming down. In Vancouver, Canada, an antique aircraft awaits rescue. This Lockheed Lodestar greets visitors to Delta's Heritage Air Park. Built in 1940, it served during the golden age of aviation. Bill Ma, a former pilot, remembers this airplane fondly. It's important to me, 1, because of its historical value, and 2, because I trained as a captain on it. I flew this airplane when I trained as an Air Canada captain. It was Trans-Canada Airlines mainliner all through the war years, flying from Vancouver through to Halifax. Eventually, I got a pin for doing $10 crossings over the Gulf of Georgia. The Lockheed Model 1808 Lodestar was a reliable workhorse, transporting critical wartime supplies. In peacetime, it carried VIPs and dignitaries. This particular Lodestar once flew some of Canada's most important passengers. It was C.D. Howe's private airplane and was even used by Prime Minister St. Laurent as a personal aircraft. This Lodestar is one of the last of its kind, but decades of exposure have taken their toll. The only things living around the aircraft are birds and bees. Look at this corrosion. The aluminum is completely gone. Bill has persuaded the Canadian Museum of Flight to take the Lodestar under its wing. Engineer John Bramagi is in charge of restoration. I look at it and think, man, I see what needs doing now, and it'll be great to fix. Let's make it new again. I hope I live long enough to see it up. It'll be a couple of years, but that's the plan. If you don't plan, nothing happens. There's one big problem. The aircraft can't fly. They must find a way to move it 54 kilometers to the museum. Heavy hauler Ron Baker takes on the job. Speed isn't important. Arriving safely is. When transporting an aircraft, there are options. A helicopter can be perfect if the load is light enough. A 126-year-old iron bridge in Iowa was flown, section by section, 27 kilometers to a new site. Lowering the 10-ton arch onto its new towers was precarious. For the Lodestar, Ron fears that a helicopter's downwash might damage its fragile structure. The airplane is old and very fragile. Loose panels could come off. The structure could collapse in the rotor wash. Since it can't fly, Ron has just one option: a road move. Transporting a fragile aircraft with a 20-meter wingspan across British Columbia's mountainous terrain will be tough. The first challenge is the Trans-Canada Highway, a vital artery into downtown Vancouver. Blocking it could cause gridlock. To minimize risks, Ron decides to dismantle the Lodestar before moving it. They schedule a crane for the next morning. The first job: remove the Lodestar's wings. They must unlock the pins securing the wings to the fuselage. Removing the bottom panel reveals severe brittleness. They consult the manual. With renewed confidence, they remove the port wing easily. But on the starboard side, the main pin is rusted solid. They've arranged a wide load permit for the next morning, but this jammed pin could delay them by days. After 6 hours of grinding, no luck. Time for Plan C. They'll resort to brute force. They remove every last bolt holding the wing in place. Then, using the crane, they pry it free. At last, both wings are off. Now they must figure out how to lift the fragile fuselage onto a truck. It took 6 hours to remove that wing. Victory is mine, they joke. In Des Moines, Jeremy prepares to lift the mighty Marilla off its foundations. Just 18 days remain. One wrong move and someone could be killed. The building is immensely heavy and brittle. An internal chimney, 30 brick-partitioned rooms, and 4 layers of solid masonry outside. Jeremy must slide over 100 tons of steel beams under it. But as they cut holes for the beams, They discover that the walls aren't solid brick as assumed. There's an air gap, and the mortar is disintegrated. One loose brick can start a domino effect. This is now a major headache. Jeremy must place the beams with absolute precision. Just as he starts, bad news. A winter storm is coming, up to 12 inches of snow. They rush to install all 43 beams despite the terrible conditions. Sliding in the first beam takes all afternoon. Then the blizzard hits. With 11 days left, they can't stop. They endure freezing rain, slush, and chaos. After a week, the complex lifting rig is complete. 43 beams, 80 hydraulic jacks. Coordinating so many jacks is rare. They must rise perfectly and sink. Jeremy hopes that when the jacks lift, a horizontal crack will appear between the walls and foundations. That's when the building is most vulnerable. They secure each jack on wooden cribs. Usually 4 jacks can lift a house. Here, each crib has 4 jacks, and there are 20 cribs total. They start pressurizing. At 650 tons of pressure, cracks appear evenly. Floor fractures in the basement halt progress. A large cistern lurks below, and the jacks above it risk collapse. They fill it with rock for support. Another day lost. Safety first. These are loose brick walls. One slip could cost lives. Finally, they lift the building 1 meter. It takes all day. Now there's no turning back. With the marilla raised, Jeremy must calculate how many wheels he needs. Too few, and they could collapse the road. In Canada, Ron's team has spent 2 days removing the Lodestar's wings. Now they worry the engines and tail might be too fragile. They decide to break the airplane into sections. With time short, they remove the engines and tail and must lift the fuselage onto a truck. It's like picking up a rotten egg. They carefully select lifting points. If they choose incorrectly, the fuselage could collapse. The crane lifts the Lodestar's fuselage, its first flight in years. They place it onto the truck along with the wings. Straps, cradles, and steel chocks secure everything. But the load is nearly 5 meters high, risking low bridges. After 3 days, the aircraft is ready for its first journey in a decade. In Des Moines, Jeremy must spread 700 tons over enough wheels so the road won't cave in. He chooses 192 wheels, but even that might not be enough. No room remains for more wheels, and they already stick out, making turns harder. At midday, they must move the marilla to the road. Melting snow turns the site into a quagmire. They get stuck. 2 60-ton winch trucks pull the marilla out. Now, on pavement, they must descend a 20-centimeter curb. They adjust each set of wheels and make it over. After 2 hours, they're on the road. Time is tight. They speed up, careful not to exceed 25 meters per hour. Halfway through, narrow streets force them onto sidewalks. Any sinking would jam traffic for hours, but they make it to the final site by late afternoon. With 1 hour before rush hour, they must line up perfectly with the new foundations. Rain threatens. The marilla descends its final slope as rain begins. They make it just in time. It's done, Jeremy sighs. The marilla lives on. 104 years so far, and hopefully another 104. In the coming years, Phil will restore this landmark as he dreamed. Back in Vancouver, the Lodestar is just meters from its final destination, but there's a gate in the way. The opening is just 20 feet. They'll need a few tries. Finally, it's through. They're amazed they made it this far. This stuff is paper thin, they say, relieved. We made it. Over the next year, the museum's team will restore the Lodestar, strengthening the tail, reinstalling the engines, and reattaching the wings. Perhaps one day, this lucky Lodestar will return to the skies once more.